So first of all, we're learning Hilchot Avelut, and as a Rav, I can tell you that these are some of the most important halachas for a Rav to know. Very few people are baki b'Hilchot Avelut, and the Rosh Kollel Rabbi Dershowitz had some speakers about learning Hilchot Avelut. As any other endeavor in halacha, you need to check on halacha whether you should learn Hilchot Avelut, and it should be as good for arichas yomim v'shonim and good health for all of us. Because if Talmidei Chachamim want eventually to be poskei halacha, these halachas are extremely important. So it's a schus for me as well, and I hope that we'll have a wonderful time learning Hilchot Avelut. And we should never need to implement these halachas in our personal lives. And we should only know achtoi v'chesed. So today we will be discussing a brief introduction to Hilchot Avelut before we delve into any specific sugyas. Are we dealing with a mitzvah d'oraisa or a mitzvah d'rabbanan? V'sholosh machlokes v'davar. The Rambam in the very first halacha in Hilchot Avelut, the Rambam writes, Min HaTorah, Avelut Yom Echad. And the Rambam writes, Yom HaMisa v'HaKavura. V'yesh la'ayin. Is it Yom HaMisa or Yom HaKavura? So when Misa and Kavura are on the same day, there really is no nafkamina. But it is so common that Yom HaMisa and Yom HaKavura are not the same day. There were countries, and we will discuss that minig eventually, but in Shuvas Noida B'Yud and Shuvas Chasam Soiva, we find that there were countries in which, al pi Gzeres Malchus, you could not bury the day of Kavura. The authorities demanded that you wait 24 hours or 48 hours between a person's death and the ability to bury him. And that was because in days of yore, it was more difficult than today to determine a person's death. They didn't have technology. So it happened more than once that a person was buried or brought to burial while he was still alive. So in many countries, the law prohibited burying a person to 24 hours or 48 hours after his demise. So when the Rambam writes, first day is Min HaTorah, Yom HaMisa v'Kavura. According to most Achronim, Kavura is the determining factor. And the day of Kavura, well, Kavura always comes after Misa, is the day of Avelut d'oraisa. Avelut Shiva Yomim, according to Rambam, is midrabanan. And that is the opinion of the Rif, of the Rosh, Perek Gimel Moed Kotten Siman Gimel. Rambam mitzvahs to say Lamed Zayin. What is the source of Avelut Yom Echad? According to the Rambam, mitzvahs to say either Lamed Zayin or Nun Zayin, Chinuch Reish Samach Daled. Mitzvahs Avelut is learned from Thomas Koyanim, Thomas Kroivim. Just like Kroivim have a chiyuv, have a mitzvah, letam alames, that is part of mitzvahs Avelut. Even a kohen is metam alames. And that is because we have a chiyuv d'oraisa of Avelut. And Avelut includes caring for the mace. What I think is pshat in the Rambam, and that is clear in Perek Beis halacha vav of Hilchos Avelut. It's not that we learn Avelut from Thomas Koyanim. Thomas Koyanim just proves the chumrah of Avelut. But we learn Avelut Yom Echad from Aaron HaKohen that didn't eat kachim, and the controversy between Moshe and Aaron. That is the source of Avelut, the Yom Rishon. But the Rambam, Perek Beis halacha vav, writes, Kamu chamuro mitzvahs Avelut that the Torah was matir tumas koyanim for family members, first of kin, to take care of a family member, and that is part of mitzvahs or avelis, which is a very interesting point that we find in the Rambam and the Chinuch. The Rif in Brochus Daf Yud brings miktsas rabosa. Some of the Rishonim maintain, and that is the Ushalmi in Moed Koten Daf Yud Daled Amid Beis, Shivas Yemei Avelis or Menatayra. And we learn it from Yosef Atzadik, V'yas la'aviv Eivel Shivas Yomim. If Yosef made Eivel Shivas Yomim, it is from here that we learn Shivas Yemei Avelis. Another source, Pesach Oyel Moed Teish Shivas Yomim Yoimam V'layla Ushmartem Es Mishmeres Mishkan Hashem. Two sources brought from the Rishonim for Avelis Shivas Yomim. According to the Rambam, those are a smachta. The Ramban in Torah Sa'odam quotes Chachmei Tzorfas, and that is Lebein Yoinen Brochas Daf Yud, that the entire concept of Avelis, Bein Yom Rishon, Bein Shayim Avelis, is only Midrabanon. Another source we find for Avelis is in Moed Koten Daf Chof Amid Beis. Chazal quotes the Posuk in Amos Perek Ches, V'afachti Chageichem le'evel, ma'chag Shivas Yomim, af Avelis Shivas Yomim. But the Rambam, in the beginning of Hilchos Avelis, writes, he also coincides Chag with Eivel, and the Rambam writes, Shivas Yemei Mishta and Shivas Yemei Eivel are Midrabanon. And in a Torah, there is only one day that is Avelis Diurais. So first of all, we brought three different opinions from Rabbi Sein.
The Rav is broken up.
I think we find out, is everyone connected? Is everyone on?
Yes.
So we find after minas lahalacha between Avelis Yom Rishon and Shayim Avelis Lagabe Tefillin. The first day of Avelis, we don't put on Tefillin, which Lachai substantiates Shittas Rambam that the first day is Minatari, the other days are Midrabanon. But that is not a raya, because the Isra of Tefillin is actually not one of Dinei Avelus. It is based on a Posuk, Pe'er Chochovesh Alecho, and another is Megoylel Be'efa. So that is not actually one of the halachas of Avelus. I would call it an external halacha, a special halacha. All the general halachas of Avelus are associated with tsar, with expression of grief, of mourning. Tefillin is different, so the fact that Ovel B'Yom Rishon Potom and Tefillin does not indicate behechreach that Avelis Yom Rishon is Menatoira or it is Chamor Mishar Yemei Avelis. Eventually, we will deal with the specifics of Alosa B'Talmud Torah, why and Ovel is also B'Tefillin. But as an introduction to Hilchos Avelis, first of all, we see three different opinions. Yesh Oyrim Sheshiris Yemei Avelis Menatoira, Yesh Oyrim Shekol Din Avelis Midrabanon, and the Rambam was somewhat of compromise. Yom Rishon Menatoira Shai Yom Midrabanon. what is the essence of Hilchos Avelut? Very famous Rashi that the Achronim discuss in Sukkah Chafei Umad Aleph. Rashi actually appears twice in Shas, Sukkah Chafei Umad Aleph and in Ksubis Davav Amud Beis. So as we know, a choson is potor mikriya shema because he is torod b'terda the mitzvah. However, an oval is not potor from any mitzvah. An oval is chayiv b'kriya shema. An oval is chayiv Reishmem and Hilchos Sukkah, Ovel, Chayiv, B'Sukkah. So the Gemara Sukkah Chafei Umad Aleph explains why is a chosen potor min Sukkah and an Ovel is Chayiv B'Sukkah. So the Gemara says a chosen is torid, but an Ovel is torid as well. A chosen is torid b'terda the mitzvah. An Ovel is not torid b'terda the mitzvah. And why not? Because of Rashi. And I'm reading the Lashon of Rashi. A chosen is torid b'terda the reshus. She'afal pishu chayev lino igabeles shem ne'ila rechitza v'sicha laharo is kvoid meisoi einoi chayev leitzta'el. So the pastor's kavanas Rashi is he needs to make believe. He needs to go through the acts. Afal pishu chayev lino igabeles shem ne'ila rechitza sicha laharo is kvoid meisoi einoi chayev leitzta'el. But don't chamishu inuyim reflect tsar? Isn't that how we define these 5 things? Chamishu inuyim. Isn't inui and tsar the same thing? But Rashi says no. Nei dechayev linhoig avelus v'ne'ila rechitza sicha mishum kvoid meisoi einoi chayev leitzta'el. So this explain he needs to do minhagei tzair avar einoi chayev liyos b'tzar, which in other words you need to make believe that you're very sad, but you don't really need to be sad. Just ke'ilu, which is not very reasonable. But the Gemara does differentiate between a chosen that is told b'terda the mitzvah and a novel that is told b'terda the reshus. We also find the Lashon of the Gemara in Sukkah, Iboya leila asu v'da'atei. Mitzvah potem in a Sukkah. But a novel is chayev b'Sukkah. Even though he doesn't have yeshiva das, it's hard for him to sit in Sukkah. So Chazal say, we know it's tough, we know it's difficult, but you need to make an effort. So, what does that mean? So, what is the essence of Avelut? The Rambam writes that the essence of Avelut is actually tshuva. Kol mi she'eino misavel kemo she'tzivu chachamim harei ze achzori. Elo, yefachei v'yidag, v'yeshpashpesh b'maso, v'yachzer b'tshuva. Do you recall another source in the Rambam, in which the Rambam connects Tanis, Misha Eino Misana, Areza Achzori, Noig Minigazorius? It's in the beginning of Hilchot Taniyos, Perek Aleph, Halacha Aleph. So the very first halacha in Hilchot Taniyos, the Rambam writes, when tragedy strikes our people, the Rambam speaks about Tanis Sibur, if there's a famine in the land, or an epidemic, a dever, umis'anin umarian. The Rambam writes that if a person is toila b'mikra, im telchu im b'keri, afani yalech imochem b'keri. So the Rambam writes if a person will not take to heart, and people will not do tshuva in a time of tragedy, that is achzorim. And the Rambam in Hilchos Avel uses that same expression. Kol mi she'eino nis'avel kafi she'tzivu chachomim harei ze achzori. Elo yefached v'yidal v'yefash v'yamasa v'yachzori b'tshuva. So according to the Rambam, the essence of Avelis is tshuva. And Sefer Chinuch as well. He always follows in the footsteps of the Rambam in Reish Samech Daled. So according to the Rambam and Sefer Chinuch, the essence of Avelis is tshuva. Is that a stila to the understanding that the essence of Avelis is tzad? I don't think so, because after all, Noge Avelis, what are the halachas of Avelis? Chamishu Inuyim. Kol dov shenoeg bo, but noeg b'tisha b'av. That's in Tanis Lamed. So when a person is shori b'tzar, it's part of the process of tshuva. But as the process of tshuva, it's not so much tsar, more inui. Because inui is machaper avoin, inui is a kapora. Inui brings a person to shivroin leiv. So it's not essentially about tsar, it's more about yefash b'masav, v'yefached. So when you're having a jolly good time, you don't do tshuva. When you're enjoying life, it's detrimental to tshuva. But when a person is shori b'tzar and shivron leivav, he is far closer to doing tshuva. So what we learn from the Rambam and the Chinuch, that Avelis is not kvoid ameis, lo kedivrei Rashi. Rashi writes, it's all about kvoid ameis. It's all about Avelis, mishum kvoid meisoi. According to the Rambam, it's tshuva, because it's tragedy. Every demise, every death is sad. Every death is tragic. So I think I quoted the Mama Chazal in the past 6 months 10,000 times more than I quoted any other Mama Chazal. So every death, regardless young or old, man or woman, every death is tragedy. Every death is like the end of the world, the end of a world. Kol Adam Yisur is a world, and Chazal don't differentiate between old or young, Sephardi or Ashkenazi, a Talmid Chacham or an Amar. It's always tragic, and therefore you need to do tshuva, and if you don't do tshuva, so we have two different interpretations. What is the essence of Avelis? According to Rashi, it's quite immense. According to the Rambam and Sefer Chinuch, it's about tshuva. But I want to come back to Rashi. Eino yechayev le'etztayar. Tshuva Sadbaz, which I quote many times, Chele Gimel Siman Tov Kuf Nun Hey. The Rambam tells a story of Echod Megedolei Hador. We don't know who that was. But Gedolei Hador, in very early sources, doesn't necessarily mean one of the great poskim or Gedolei Torah Shebedor. Let me remind you, Yisur Bas Talmid Chochem Lo Yimotzo Yisur Bas Gedolei Hador. Gedolei Hador in Chazal and maybe in the Radbaz as well means a very important person, not necessarily Gedolei Torah, but the Radbaz tells a story of Echad Megedolei Hador that lost his son, and obviously it was a young son, and he didn't cry at all. Is that a madrega? And the Radbaz says Noag Minig Achzorius. Once again, Minig Achzorius. So the lesson of the Radbaz probably comes from the lesson of the Rambam. That Baz writes it's a minig achzorius. A person should cry. But how come you didn't cry? So from the Radbaz, it seems to be that the mitzvah is to cry. It's part of your chiyuv. It's part of what Avelut is about. You're supposed to cry. And if you didn't cry, the Radbaz writes, minig achzorius. And that is the same as the Rambam. When the Rambam writes, Kol mi she'einu mis'avel kol mo she'tzivu chachomim harei ze achzori. I once was Menachem, a person who lost his wife, and she was relatively young. And I was taken aback, a very choshev person, a senior person, a big Talmid Chochem, a leader of a community. And he was sitting, and he seemed to be so happy, smiling and darshaning. He didn't close his mouth a moment. And he told everybody that came to be Menachem, I'm very happy, everything is good. And what he said 1,000 times, I was just sitting there at 10 minutes. He said, people say, Sevet Zayin good. It's going to be good. I don't say it's going to be good. It's good. Everything is good. And I was taken aback. Because when he's sitting Avelut and your wife had passed away, not everything is good. But not everything is good. And this is a period in which you don't say Baruch HaToiva Meitiv, you say Baruch Dayan Emes. You say Baruch Dayan Emes, you don't say Baruch HaToiva Meitiv. So according to that, if you didn't cry, then you're an achzori. Should one be sad or not? But the Gemara tells a story of one of the greatest Amirom that didn't cry. Shabbos Kuf Nun Aleph, Amud Aleph. Rav Chanina lost a child, and he did not cry. And his wife was disturbed and troubled. And his wife asked him, Tarnegula afkis mebeisech? So, did a chicken die in our home? His wife asked him. How come you're not crying? And he responded by saying, Tichla va'avira, death and blindness. We lost a child. And Chazal bring, Mama Chazal, Shishu Demoy said, Dimushel Bechi is not good for your health. So Reb Chanina Bar Choma was the greatest, one of the greatest Talmidim of Rabbeinu HaKodesh, and he didn't cry. And he said, Tichla va'avira. Does that prove that one does not have to cry? Shalo Kedivrei HaRadbaz. I didn't check the Radbaz, but to the best of my memory, the Radbaz does not quote the Gemara in Shabbos Daf Kuf Nun Aleph, when the Gemara says that Reb Chanina actually did not cry. So this Sfas Emes on the spot proves from this Gemara that an oval doesn't have a chiyuv of bechi, but then the Sfas Emes asks from the Gemara Moikot and Daf Chav Zayin and Beis, Shloishu lebechi, Shivu lemispad, Shloishu mitispoires. So the Gemara in Moed Katan says there are 3 different periods in Avelut. Shloishu lebechi, Shivu lemispad, Shloishu mitispoires, which means 30 days of Dinei Avelut. Of Aveima is Beis Chodesh, but other Avelim is 30 days. So this is what Sam says. According to the Gemara in Shabbos Kuf Nun Aleph, we need to say Shloishu lebechi doesn't mean you need to cry 3 days. It means you should not cry more than 3 days. So that's the Sfas Emes Shabbos Kuf Nun Aleph. Agos Hayavitz, Rabbi Yankel Venden says, maybe this Gemara proves you don't have to cry. And he also says Shloishu lebechi means not more than 3 days. But then he says no. Maybe Reb Chanina was old and he was ill and he suffered from an eye condition. And he knew that crying would damage his eyes. And he didn't want Chas v'Sholem to become blind. And that's why he fought his natural inclination. He fought human nature, and he made an effort not to cry. He cried in his heart. but he didn't cry with tears because that would endanger his eyesight. And I think Rabbi Yankov Emden makes more sense, and that is what he said, Tichlo va'avila. He apologized to his wife, and he said, it's a tragedy, but I don't want to become blind. So obviously he had an eye condition. And in the medicine of their day and age, they had no cure. And crying with tears could impair his eyesight. So that doesn't prove that there is no mitzvah of bechi. Going back to Sukkah Chofei, to the Rashi, the Yoruch Laner and Sukkah also asked that question, Shloishu lebechi. And the Yoruch Laner, just like the Sosemes, and Rabbi Yankov Emden says, so maybe Shloishu lebechi means not more than 3 days. But the Yoruch Laner is a Yashrin. I don't know whether you're familiar with the Yoruch Laner because it's only on some Masechtas and not the Yeshivish Masechtas. We have Yoruch Laner on Sanhedrin, on Malchus, on Krisis, Nida, and the Choshev to Yoruch Laner is Yevomis. He's at his best in Yevomis. The Yoruch Laner's introduction writes that he decided to write the Masechtas which we have no Pnei Yeshua. He wanted to for the Pnei Yeshua, and that is quite an undertaking. No one could compare to the Pnei Yeshua. The Pnei Yeshua is probably the climax of Pilpul in Pshat. But the Yoruch Laner intentionally wrote his forum on Masechtas, which the Pnei Yeshua did not write. But the Yoruch Laner is a Yashrin. So when Rashi writes Einer Chayav L'Tztayar, the Yoruch Laner asks, Shloishu lebechi, how could a person cry if he's not bitzar? Would that be false tears? So the Yoruch Laner, just like Rabbi Yankov Emden, the Sosemen suggests, maybe Shloishu lebechi means not more than 3 days, but then he says, Eina dova misyashevim shivu lehesped v'shloishu l'tispeiros. Shloshim Tispeiros doesn't mean not more than 30 days. Shiva lehesped doesn't mean not more than 7 days. Shiva lehesped means 7 days you should be oisig lehesped. Shloshim yoim you should be oisig le'avelus. So gimel lebechi should mean the same. So therefore, Yoruch Laner doesn't write it. But therefore, I think that the Pshat of Rabbi Yankov Emden is the more reasonable Pshat than Rabbi Chanina Bar Choma in Shabbos Kuf Nun Aleph. Yes, it's a mitzvah to cry. 3 days you cry, 7 days you're maspid, and 30 days you're noig min hagavelis. Why didn't Reb Chanina do so? Because he didn't want to impair his eyesight. Suma choshev kemeis. And when we learned that suma choshev kemeis, I think that would add additional weight to Reb Chanina apologizing to his wife and saying, Tichlo va'avira, we lost a child. You want to lose me as well. I might go blind. And suma choshev kemeis. She'iltas de Rav Achai Goin, Pashas Chayis Sora, V'yove Avrom litzpoi de Sora v'lifkoiso. She'iltas de Rav Achai Goin, and many times I mentioned the Machlokes Rashbam and Taisus twice in Shas. According to Rashbam, the She'iltas is actually Rav Achai that we find in Shas Bavli. And he was one of the Reis Amayroim. Taisus says, no, he was in the days of the Goinim. Shiltas de Rav Achai Goin, Shilta Yud Zayin, writes, Mechayev le'mifkayei ve'lemispedayei ve'lemikberei. If a person has a family member that died, he has a chiyuv of bechi, mispod, and kavura. So let's come back to Rashi. And I want to share with you my understanding of Rashi. Crying is part of human nature. And then Ramban Parshas Achrei Mois, Perush al HaTorah. Lois is guided to v'lo tesimu krucha bein einechem lemeis. The Ramban writes, HaTorah lo te'asor et habechi. Teva ha'odam livkois behiporeid o oy havim. And that is why Avraham Avinu cried. So the Ramban writes, Lo tasimu krocho ben einechem lemeis. Ein leis abel yoiser medai, bonem atum Hashem Elokeichem. A Jew is never alone. A Yid is never alone. He always has a Kodesh Baruch Hu. He always has Avinu Shebashamayim. He is never alone. But a Torah lo tesor et habechi. Teva hodem livkois b'yipored avoyavim. So crying is a natural expression of grief, of Avelus. And that is the mitzvah. So maybe it's not a mitzvah to cry, but it is a mitzvah. Leis Abel. And Leis Abel means to be sad. I think the Machlokes Rashi and Rambam is, so where do we go from here? When a person is misabel, what is the objective? Kavod Ameis, Tshuva. But it all starts with the fundamental halacha of being sad. That is the essence of Avelus. And being sad means crying. Of course, an Oven needs to be sad. And the mitzvah of Avelus is not to pretend to being sad. So, Rechlinug ba'Avelus berechitza, b'ne'ila, b'sicha mishem koid meisoi, ach eino yichayev le'etztayer. Doesn't mean you need to pretend. But my understanding is this. There's a difference between simcha and sa'ar. Simcha is a positive midah. Sadness is a negative midah. Generally, a Torah doesn't want us to be sad. In Minchas Osha Kroli HaMitzvahs, and I ask my precious and beloved son-in-law to fix me if I'm making a mistake. I think there is an entire simon on Simcha Shel Mitzvah. Is that true? In Sefer Kroli HaMitzvahs, Simcha,
yes.
It's in the Sefer, or it's a separate simon that I said about?
In the Sefer.
Is it? It's in the Sefer.
Yes.
So there's a very special simon in Kroli HaMitzvahs about Simcha Shel Mitzvah. And I think I brought 15 or 16 or 17 different sources of mitzvahs of Simcha. Just this week, I added on another one, which I wasn't aware of. That's one we skipped. So in the next Madura and Kroli HaMitzvahs, I need to add another one. So Simcha is a positive attribute. It's a positive mitzvah. It's a positive midah. The Charedim quotes the Ari HaKodesh that all the madregas he achieved by Simcha Shel Mitzvah and Simcha Shel Torah. So a chassan needs to be a b'simcha. An oval doesn't need to be b'simcha. It's not our goal. It's a mitzvah, but it's a b'di'evedik mitzvah. It's not, a chassan needs to be as happy as he can be. An oval doesn't need to be as sad as he can be. Lefer. I want to make a very fundamental argument, which I had an argument with the Talmud Chacham. There's a mitzvah of Nichum Avelim. So one of the Achronim writes, we have a mitzvah of Nichum Avelim, but the oval doesn't have a mitzvah Esnachem. The oval doesn't have a mitzvah Esnachem. And I say, if we have a mitzvah to be menachemim, be'echreach rotzen ha'Torah she'yitnachem. If a Kodesh Baruch Hu doesn't want him to be misnachem, why would he have a mitzvah lenachmoi? If he's supposed to be as sad as possible, why be menachemim? Why try to alleviate his pain and sadness? Why? He should be even more sad than he is. If we have a mitzvah lenachem, he has a mitzvah le'esnachem, which means an oval is sad. And that's the way he should be. But he needs to try to be memayit his sadness. Because generally the Torah doesn't like us when we're sad. It's not good to be sad. It's good to be sameach. It's not good to be sad. And therefore, an Avel should be Torid B'terde de Simcha. An Avel should try not to be Torid B'tzar or Avelis. He should try to calm down. And we have a mitzvah to calm him down. We have a mitzvah to try to alleviate his grief and to calm him down. And that is the mitzvah of Nichol. Your suffering. Don't be torrid. Your terde is not a terde de mitzvah. Your terde shalsar is something you should try to prevent, try to avoid, try to alleviate. So the Shom is down in Orebach, Chelik Beisim in Tzadik Vav has an interesting tshuva in Dinei Abelis. And the Shoel asks him, why is the Nuban entitled to drink wine? Wine is Mesameach. He's supposed to be Bitzar. So it's either the Shoel or Reb Shlomo Zalman himself wants to prove Rashi is right. He doesn't need to be in Tzar, and that's why he's entitled to drink wine. Ein simcha le'babasa v'yayin, it's simchas yantiv. And I say only Chazal were kaveya the gather of simcha and the gather of Tzar. Tisha B'Av you don't drink wine. Well, Tisha B'Av you don't drink anything. And Einan doesn't drink wine. Shavuos Shechal B'Tisha B'Av we don't drink wine. Because that's Avelis and Chorban Beis HaMikdash. Avelis Yochad, we need to try to alleviate his grief. So Reb Shlomo Zalman makes a pilpul. And Reb Shlomo Zalman says, when a person is neutral, Yain Yisamach Levavinosh. Yain won't take a pilpul. So Yain will only bring him one madrega. If he's Betzar, he'll alleviate his tzar, but it won't be Sameach. If he's not Betzar, then Yain Yisamach Levavinosh. I say, an Ovel is entitled to drink wine. Anything he could do, Lahofik Tzaroi, and to bring him some Simcha is a mitzvah. Give him a little cup of wine, he's not going to break out dancing. He's profoundly sad. And we have a mitzvah Nachman, and he has a mitzvah Le'nachem. And that's Oime Kavonas Rashi, Einoi Chayev Le'itzayer. It's not a terror to the mitzvah. The Torah wants a chosen to be as happy as possible. The Torah doesn't want an ovel to be as sad as possible. And that is why when he's told about Avelis, it's not defined as a terror to the mitzvah. Kach nerelani uzdaiti. And to me, this pshat has a lot of appeal because kosher b'yein Eloimah, he needs to pretend to be Bitzai, but he doesn't need to be Bitzai, and that is the Havana most people have in Rashi. Linig min hogei tzar. If a person has a mitzvah linig min hogei tzar, it is because he's supposed to be Bitzai. And I say, it's nature. And Torah never expects us to deny human nature. Human nature is part of who we are. It's part of who we are supposed to be. We're human. And of course, God wants us to be human. You know the word of the Kotzker Rebbe, Anshe Kodesh Tiyuli, Menschlich Heilig. The Kiddush of human beings, not the Kiddush of angels, not the Kiddush of Malachi Ashoris. And over this Bitzar, and that is the way it should be. But the Torah doesn't want him to be Ba'oime Katzar. And he's supposed to do everything to try, Les Nachem, Les Chazek, move on in life. And if we have a mitzvah of Nichum Avelim, the Ovel has a mitzvah Les Nachem, and that is why Chazal did not prohibit Shtiyas Yayin for an Ovel. Tnu Yayin Morei Nefesh, the Posik says. It is a means of alleviating pain and grief. And that is why an Ovel is not also a Shtiyas Yayin. So that's my pshat in Rashi. So I am already running late in Basin, but I think this was an important introduction on the Mahus of Avelus. The Kuliban, I'm sure we'll speak about this year. And as we move forward in Hilchot Avelus, probably Olavrayis Lakan Lakan. Thank you.